friends, and welcome back to another episode of Superhero Saturday, where we talk about the art of superheroes, storytelling, and so much more. My name is Annie, and today we are going to be talking about more of the history of superhero costumes, specifically with the Silver Age of Comics, which took place, depending on who you're talking to, the late 1950s into the 1960s and through to the end toward like 1970. This is the next installment in a series that I'm doing on the history of superhero costumes, so if you would like to take a look at the other videos that I've done, I should be making a playlist at some point. Editing Annie, help me out here, sister. And there should be also a link in the description for the previous video, which is for the Atomic Age of Comics, and also, dang, I keep second guessing myself. I think it's here. For this series, what we're doing is we're going through each of the different eras of comic book and superhero history, taking a look at what was happening in the world and the United States in that era, checking out what fashion looked like at the time, and applying those superhero costumes influenced by the time period, fashion idea sense, to my own superheroes. So at the end of this video, you're going to see me apply everything that we learned into a redesign of my own superhero characters' costumes as if they existed or were created during the time that we talked about. Last time we talked about superhero costumes, we talked about the Atomic Age, which is the age of comics that happened around the 1950s in the United States, when there was a huge dip and almost all superhero comic books disappeared off the market. The only superheroes to have survived this time with their stories still intact are Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman. But the start of the 1960s was a complete revitalization of the industry, and though it's called, in general terms, the Silver Age of Comics, Stan Lee himself decided to coin it the Marvel Age of Comics, and that's not incorrect at all. But first, a little taste of the world. After the 1950s, the 1960s was an era of change. There was tons of polarization in American society and the world about what we were doing as humans who were interconnected across the world with each other to move us into the future. We were now looking forward to a future that we could realize for ourselves. And that meant a lot of people were very intent on making a future that was worth living for. Unfortunately, a better future means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. In an era that was rife with conflict, including the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, second wave feminism, and so many other changes in society, things were just crazy all over. But thankfully, a lot of people did push into what was better, because out of this era, we got a lot of better rights for a lot of different types of people. We had the anti-war movement that influenced a lot of pacifism in the United States, and we did have a lot of technological advancements that were reflected in a lot of different types of media, especially science fiction, including the start of Star Trek, the original series, which I drew a lot of influence from for this later costume. Though this era later came to be known as the Marvel Age of Comics, the revitalization of superhero media actually did start with DC Comics. In the late 1950s, DC Comics got all their three main superhero characters together on one comic title, which was under the group the Justice League of America. This team dynamic spread throughout the series made for a lot more interesting storytelling, because it wasn't just about these three individual heroes doing their own business, but about how they related with each other. It also featured a lot of crossover content, which was great because it helped fans to branch out into other areas and bring each other in on the stories that they loved. Then the Justice League of America started to grow and pull in characters from other eras, like the revitalized Flash character and the completely redesigned Green Lantern. Over at Marvel Comics, which actually wasn't even a competitor at this time with DC Comics, because they didn't even have any superhero titles to their name, and their distribution was owned by DC Comics, there was a push to create a superhero team like the Justice League, but new and different, to kind of start to capitalize on that popularity. Cue superhero comics legend Stan freaking Lee and his whole team of creators. When Stan Lee got the call to create a new team of superheroes, he was actually thinking of switching careers at the time. The superhero industry had virtually disappeared, and he just wasn't really having very much fun. His wife, however, gave him the brilliant idea to at least go out of the industry with a bang. He's got this new assignment, he might as well do a comic the way that he thinks that they should be done. So Stan threw all caution to the winds and put together this new team of superhero characters that had never previously been seen, sort of, called the Fantastic Four. Not only was this a team of superheroes, but it was also a family of superheroes. They all operate as a family who knows each other's identities, whose identities are not secret, and whose powers are thrust upon them by this crazy scientific accident. Which was totally in place for the time, especially at the end of the 50s, when all of this new science was still a really big deal. Another thing that they did with the Fantastic Four was to design the characters around actual personalities first, rather than start off with a gimmicky superpower. All of these characters really had superpowers that were seen before in the comics world. The Human Torch was actually a previous character, and a stretchy, flexible man was not a new thing either. However, these individuals' personalities are what compels the story forward, rather than just the latest bad guy that somebody has to stop. These are characters with real personalities, real quirks, real character flaws, and real conflicts, especially with each other. In the end, it was the story first, and the art and everything else kind of followed after that. In fact, the Marvel method of story writing is focused very heavily on team collaboration. Oftentimes, what Stan Lee would do was sketch out a very brief synopsis, sometimes even over the phone, and tell his artists what kind of wanted to happen throughout the course of the story. And then the artist might sometimes ask, well, then what happens in the pages in between? And Stan Lee would say, I don't know, make something up. Some artists really thought that this lack of structure was weird and they didn't really like it. At other companies, they would just get handed a script line for line and have to draw that and fit that in. But Stan Lee recognized the creativity of his people. He recognized that they had great potential for taking the story and adding to it whatever they wanted to, so he gave them the freedom to do so. And the artists who were at Marvel Comics at the time really grabbed onto this and ran with it. Stan Lee and his team were also actually a big force in the diversification of comics as well. Remember, in the 1960s, this was the heat of the civil rights movement, and everything was kind of in flux. But Stan Lee, being a lover of people and personalities, wanted to see that represented in his medium. So, legend has it, on a bet, Stan Lee created Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos. This team was specifically diverse, with characters that were from all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds. Stan Lee also started to reach far and wide with his new method of creating superheroes. And at this time, we saw the creation of a ton of different characters, including the Hulk, Doctor Strange, Thor, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Black Panther, and of course the iconic Spider-Man. And because Marvel's distribution was owned by DC, they were actually legally only allowed to release 8 superhero-related titles a month. So they could hardly even cram all of these stories into the pages of the comic books they were allowed to put out. DC, of course, capitalized on this as well, and the back and forth between Marvel and DC spurred them both on to create even more great superhero comics for the media to consume. Comic books were flying off the shelves, sometimes in the millions at a time. And soon the horror and scary type crazy stories started to go their own ways. This was helped in part by the Comics Code Authority, which was created in the late 1950s as a response to the crazy, outlandish stories that they were producing in place of superhero comics. These often showed very graphic scenes, and so the Comics Code Authority was the equivalent of a rating system. And if you had a Comics Code Authority stamp on the cover of your comic book, that meant that it was quote-unquote safe enough for children. In spite of this, and the fact that superhero comics were traditionally viewed as a medium for children, the fact that they were putting personality first in their storytelling and actually focusing on relationships that were relatable meant that a lot of these comics started getting a much wider, more intelligent audience, including college kids. But then again, we were also brought the 1960s Batman TV show. All in all, by the end of the 1960s, it was clear that superhero stories had come back to stay. Now that that context is out of the way, let's take a look at the practical application of this video, which is designing my own superhero characters as if they were invented during the Silver Age of comics. For our male superhero redesign, we have, of course, Cannonball Cooper, whose costume is actually going to change quite a bit for this video. It's going to move a lot closer to the modern version because I actually really dig the bold lines and colors of the 1960s, and so that's internal for my own creation. So as you can see in this drawing, the first thing that I did for his costume was to get rid of the cape. That's exactly what happened in DC with their redesign of the Green Lantern, and you can see it also in the new costume for the Flash. After ditching the cape, I decided to give Cannonball Cooper a big prominent emblem on his chest, which was a real big thing in the 60s because you can see a lot of the logos appearing across mediums, especially in all the works that Stan Lee had his hand in. I also drew a little bit from the Fantastic Four, which actually calls back to my modern version with the stripes on his costume. So we've got his blue collar and a blue line up and down his chest and for his belt. I also ended up ditching the underoos, which, yes, finally, based on some of the costume designs for example, Spider-Man, that didn't feature the underwear on the outside. And I gave Cannonball Cooper kind of a space age vibe with this like jumpsuit looking thing where you can still see, you know, there were underoos there at one time, but it's more focused on the gloves and the boots. Now you will notice that I didn't give him hands for his gloves because in my stories, because of his super strength and invulnerability, having material on his fists is actually not a good idea. So I decided to just give him gauntlets to match his stripes and his boots. The boots are also simpler and a little bit shorter to more fit with the 1960s style. Also, at the last minute, I realized I totally should have given him a Beatles haircut, but I didn't because I don't really like the Beatles. So, sorry friends. So there we have it. We have the Silver Age costume for Cannonball Cooper. For the female character, I, of course, redesigned the costume for my superhero Redemption. Since there were a lot more female superheroes at this time, I was able to draw from a couple of different sources other than Wonder Woman, and I really let that influence my redesign. I did end up giving her kind of like a poofy crown thing. I don't know exactly what that hairstyle is called. I also shortened her skirt by just a little bit. I realized I did make it fairly short in the last version, but mini skirts were all the rage in the 1960s. So I pulled it up a little bit. I also threw on some tights underneath, so it's really classic Star Trek original series vibes as well. I also had the big stripes on the hems and on the gloves and boots to kind of give her that space age vibe as well, and made those a little bit shorter on the forearms and the calves to make it more 60s rather than 50s. I also gave her a little bit more of a prominent logo because, like I said with the other one, logos were a really big deal. It's a very big marketing kind of rallying point. Having some kind of really iconic symbol to center your heroes and your merchandise around was really helpful for people to identify with and cling to a superhero character. We also stuck with the really bold colors of purple and yellow that were actually really pretty popular in the 60s. I also gave Redemption a little bit of a different makeup look. Apparently the nude or light colored soft lipstick was a big deal, and also having powdery colored eyeshadow and cat eye eyeliner. And there you have it. We have our Silver Age redesigns of Cannonball Cooper and Redemption up on the screen for you. I think they came out really good, and I actually had a little too much fun on this. I even added shading and stuff because I thought it would be cool. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more about the history of superhero costumes, you can check out my other videos, and we'll be doing another one of these in the next couple of weeks sometime, featuring the next era of superhero history. And we're also getting really close to our 100 subscriber mark. Once we hit that 100 subscriber mark, I will be taking your guys' suggestions on superhero characters and turning them into character design concepts and presenting them to you in a special 100 subscriber video. If you did like this video, go ahead and give us a big thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you would like to see even more superhero related content every single Saturday. You can support us by going over to our Patreon page and joining the team over there. And if you want to see more of superhero awesomeness, you can go ahead and check out our website at www.fearless9.com, where I have my original series, The Fearless 9, up and available for you to purchase and read, even electronically if you would like to be COVID friendly. Thanks again for watching, Super Friends, and we'll see you next week. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming, 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 swimming. Swimming, swimming, swimming. My quarantine hair is coming back. My quarantine hair is coming